Because he's got a full video. Video that video's not needed. And that's what the media managers are for. But he thinks you're stupid. And if you have to pull video, you have 3 hours of live class. Why are you not pulling video with this guy?
How are you? All right? Things are good?
Were they rolling on you?
We try to raise the bar.
I like seeing that smile on it. Very happy.
Okay.
I just told the team we will answer any questions on congestion. But if taxes should be treated this way, yeah, we're going to just say, you can ask the question. I don't want it to seem like we're snowballing.
Yeah, I took over for Sergio. We switched cameras, so I just wanted to make sure that
Oh, the picnic.
It's fine. It's gonna. It's
86.
I'm gonna give a statement.
Channel 7. Yeah, I'm relieving them.
I'm not saying like it's about.
We didn't scare them off.
Yeah, that's a different. I think that also
That's better. That's a better idea. I'm like, and I heard he drank. I know he's drinking with his toe. I know.
Sir?
Yeah. Good morning. Like us. No, city cars. When the city car takes, somebody takes
Who is it?
I'm sorry, the chair. Where's Sean?
Antoine is doing exactly outside with the chair.
Now?
Yeah, before it starts. Could you plug? The live view.
I'm waiting.
If you have any signage that you want to show at this hearing while you're in your seats, it cannot be larger than 8.5 by 11, this size. You cannot hold it over your head. Only right in front of you. We don't want you blocking people behind you. Okay, so if you have any signs, just keep them down here, and it can't be larger than this. We can't have any interruptions during the hearing. We have over 70 people that have signed up to testify. And we're going to be here for a while, so we need everybody's cooperation. So there's no screaming, there's no clapping, there's no booing, none of that stuff. Traditionally, if people agree with what folks are saying, I see folks waving the hands and doing this. If you disagree, I see people doing this. It's up to you, but you cannot scream out, clap, or make any noises during the hearing. Should you need to take a call, you can do that outside. We will ask right now folks that have any electronic devices to turn the audio off on those electronic devices. You may take your conversation outside and take that call outside, and then once you're done, you may re-enter. If you have any questions, do not approach the dais at any time. Just get the attention of one of us sergeant at arms, and we'll answer your question to the best of our ability. Thank you so much for your cooperation. We're not quite ready yet, so you can continue to make friends. We'll let you know when we're good to go. All right.
gaggle's going now, by the way. Twan, the gaggle's going now. The gaggle's going now.
Can everybody settle down, please? Settle down. Good morning and welcome to the New York City Council hearing of the Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure. At this time, can everybody please silence your cell phones? If you wish to testify, please go up to the sergeant's desk to fill out a testimony slip, even if you already registered online. Written testimony can be emailed to testimony@council.nyc.gov. Again, that is testimony@council.nyc.gov. At this time and going forward, no one is to approach the dais. Thank you for your cooperation. Chair, we are ready to begin.
Good morning, and thank you for joining today's hearing of the Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure on congestion pricing and the MTA's fiscal future. I'm Sylvina Brooks-Powers, and I have the honor of chairing this committee. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that today marks an exciting experiment at the Council. We are piloting a new paperless approach to hearings. In order to reduce our paper use, today's committee report can be accessed digitally with the QR code located on our committee sign in the back of the chamber. All council members will also be accessing the committee report and other relevant documents on the tablets. I hope that with lessons learned from today's hearing, this can become a new model for the City Council going forward. In April 2019, the fiscal 2020 New York State Executive Budget authorized the MTA to establish a congestion tolling program, commonly known as congestion pricing, in the Central Business District, the area of Manhattan south of and including 60th Street. The goals of congestion pricing are several. It promises to reduce traffic on the city's overcrowded streets and improve air quality and reduce greenhouse gas emissions by encouraging New Yorkers to utilize public transportation. Most importantly for the MTA, it will provide an important new revenue source for the authority, as the state requires that all congestion tolling revenue goes towards funding MTA capital programs. This presents a meaningful opportunity to ensure our subways, buses, and commuter rail systems continue to meet New Yorkers' needs in the near and long term. Overall, the MTA anticipates collecting net revenue sufficient to generate $15 billion for the MTA capital program through the tolling program. The MTA has expressed that this funding is necessary to help modernize the city's subway system, including updating the city's outdated signaling system and making the subway more accessible for people with disabilities. The launch of congestion pricing in the city is now imminent, but it is crucially important that it be implemented equitably. For far too long, transportation agencies in the city have underinvested in transportation deserts. Residents in outer borough neighborhoods often have few public transit options and have rarely seen new investment to improve what options do exist. It is my hope that today's hearing will explore how to ensure that MTA's congestion pricing program is launched in a way that is equitable and that prevents unintended hardships in vulnerable communities citywide. Although the state, not the City Council, will decide who will be exempt from congestion pricing, we hope to have a dialogue and ask a few questions regarding exemptions and how they will be implemented. For example, state law requires that the program exempt disabled persons from the congestion charge. How is the MTA implementing this exception? What additional exemptions to the tolling program should be considered? How will taxis for hire vehicles and private buses be impacted? What provisions will be made for low-income New Yorkers living in transit deserts? And what about our seniors or those with medical appointments in the Central Business District? We hope to discuss these potential exemptions and their effects on the tolling structure. It is also crucial that congestion pricing revenue is spent equitably, including by improving core transit infrastructure in transportation deserts. We will talk today about what the MTA plans to do with the tens of billions of dollars that congestion pricing will generate. We are interested in hearing about cost controls the MTA has in place to make sure that congestion pricing revenue is wisely spent. The committee is also interested in discussing how the MTA will measure and analyze the effects of congestion tolling on New Yorkers, the environment, and revenue streams in a way that is transparent and clearly defined. We'll also discuss the MTA's future operational fiscal outlook. The world has dramatically changed since the state first approved congestion pricing 4 years ago, with the global pandemic fundamentally reshaping our society. The pandemic altered the behaviors of riders and drivers alike as ridership plummeted under citywide stay-at-home orders. The uptick in hybrid working continues to adversely affect ridership levels and the MTA's ability to generate fare box revenue, which accounted for approximately 40% of the MTA's annual operating budget prior to the pandemic. We hope to hear about how the MTA plans to adapt to these changes in the years to come. In May, the state enacted its fiscal year 2024 executive budget, which sought to help balance the MTA's books. This budget included increases to the city's payroll mobility tax and the city's contribution to the MTA for the cost of paratransit services and directed a portion of future casino revenues to the MTA. The committee looks forward to hearing how additional city taxpayer funding will be spent by the MTA and how the city's contribution to paratransit impacts its management of the program. The budget also funded several new and exciting initiatives, including a free bus pilot, automated bus lane enforcement, and targeted upgrades to subway services. We look forward to hearing more about how these programs will impact rider experience in New York City. In July, the MTA released its calendar year 2024 preliminary operating budget, which totals $19.8 billion. These expenses are funded through a combination of resources, including $5.1 billion from fare box revenue. This is a significant reduction from pre-pandemic fare box projections, which exceeded $6 billion annually. The plan includes a 4% fare and a 5.5% toll increase to be implemented in August or September 2023. This increase is expected to generate approximately $205 million annually in fare box revenue and $133 million in toll revenue. The committee looks forward to hearing from the MTA about its planned fare and toll hike, as well as their plans to improve its service and accessibility in the wake of these increases. We are also hearing one resolution today for which I serve as the prime sponsor. Resolution number 390 concerns the proposed Queens Link project, which would reactivate transit along the long dormant corridor of the Rockaway Beach branch of the Long Island Railroad. The resolution we are considering today calls on the MTA to conduct a comprehensive environmental impact study on the viability of Queens Link, building on a letter from last summer signed by 17 city, state, and federal officials calling for such a study. Finally, I note that the Department of Transportation and the Taxi and Limousine Commission were invited to today's hearing. The administration has an important role to play in helping to coordinate the implementation of congestion pricing. And while I'm disappointed that the representatives from the administration are not here to answer the questions that are specific to their role, the committee will be following up with a public letter with questions to the administration. In this spirit, I want to express my sincere appreciation to the MTA for joining us today. I look forward to hearing from them as well as advocates and members of the public. I want to thank my staff and committee staff as well for their hard work. Mark Chen, counsel to the committee, Samuel Breitbart, counsel to the committee, Kevin Kotowski, senior policy analyst, John Basile, senior policy analyst, Michael Sherman, senior financial analyst, Benjamin Fang from the Speaker's Press team, Jack Siegenthaler, my policy and budget director, and Renee Taylor, my chief of staff. I'd like to acknowledge we have also in attendance today council members Farrah Lewis, David Carr, and we have council member Joanne Ariola online. And we also are joined by Councilmember Kagan, and Holden, Councilmember Brewer, and we are also joined by Public Advocate Jumani Williams. Now I'd like to invite the Public Advocate to offer remarks.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. My name is Jumani Williams, and I am in the still existing office of Public Advocate for the City of New York. I want to thank Chair Brooks Powell and the members of the Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure for holding this hearing. Thank you to President Davey and the entire team of the MTA for being here. In June of 2023, the final federal hurdle in the implementation of congestion pricing in New York City was cleared, marking the first time in the United States that a congestion pricing program is set to become reality. For years, New York City has been ranked as one of the most congested and traffic-clogged American cities. Per the program, drivers will be charged a fee to enter Manhattan south of 60th Street, one of the world's busiest commercial districts. The fee is yet to be set and will be determined by the MTA, which is overseeing the tolling program, which is also anticipated to generate $1 billion annually for MTA capital projects. Congestion pricing, which is slated to begin next year, aims to reduce traffic and pollution and provide much-needed transit improvements. I am in support of these goals and proud to have been so since relatively few of us were doing it in my first term in office, and want to emphasize that the pursuit of these outcomes should not be at the expense of others. I urge the Traffic Mobility Review Board to be conscientious of ongoing concerns raised by workers who rely on the vehicles, low-income drivers, residents, and businesses within the Central Business District tolling zone, and neighbors of the surrounding communities. I do know that there might be some discussions about exemptions. They should be few and far between, and slightly more discounts. Without those, there will be a disproportionate financial burden on taxi for hire vehicles, Uber and Lyft drivers, and also the relatively few low-income drivers who go into the city. I do think there should be discounts for Uber and Lyft drivers. I would be remiss if I didn't say I think the burgeoning industry of Lyft and Uber did add to some of the congestion that we're speaking about. Without some of the discounts, we may see fare increases and decrease in demand for taxis and for hire rides. For rideshare drivers, the review board should find a way to ensure that rideshare companies are responsible for the fees, not the individual drivers, and the fee should not be the full proposed $22, nor should drivers be tolled for multiple trips. Furthermore, low-income drivers who may live in transit deserts and rely on their vehicles as a result, of course this is relatively few, should also benefit from discounts and a limited number of tolls. It is my understanding that the MTA has already conducted studies and assessments on these proposals. It's my hope that they follow through to mitigate negative impacts to low-income and working-class New Yorkers. Additionally, another concern relates to unintended consequences for residents and businesses within the tolling zone as well as the surrounding communities. Small businesses in tolling zones have shared worries that congestion pricing may lead to lower foot traffic and freights and deliveries may potentially be impacted. I'm a proponent of utilizing public transportation where applicable, but as we know, transit access is not equitable across the city. Thus, cars may be one of the only means of transportation for some. There are also environmental concerns in regards to diverted traffic from congestion pricing. In particular, I think of low-income communities of more color that may see greater traffic pollution in response to drivers finding alternative routes throughout the city. They may end up parking in these neighborhoods and take up additional parking spaces, which may lead to greater traffic buildup. Places like Northern Manhattan and the South Bronx, who have the highest death and disease rates of asthma in the country, do not need to bear the brunt of more pollution. While congestion pricing is ultimately moving forward, and it should expeditiously, without pause, with the goal of improving environmental outcomes, we must ensure that it does not end up becoming merely a redirection of existing traffic pollution. Perhaps as a way we can prevent people from parking during the day from outside of those communities. I hope the Traffic Mobility Review Board, the MTA, and the DOT keep all the aforementioned concerns in mind and collectively devise implement a congestion pricing program that is equitable across the board, mitigate financial burden on New York City working class and communities of more color, and improve environmental outcomes. Every New Yorker deserves a chance to live, work, and play in the city we call home. That includes improving transportation access and outcomes for all. Lastly, I just want to say, as a driver, a cyclist, and a pedestrian, my family comes from a family of drivers. We do know that cars are the most protected, the most dangerous, and carry the most people, the least sorry people on the road, yet we have the most infrastructure for them. That is something that we definitely have to change. Most working class and low income New Yorkers do not drive in daily. They take mass transit. If you are driving daily into the city, you are doing so mostly because you want to do so out of convenience. And if we are going to change things, that means we have to change things. I know that it is difficult for some folks, but we have to. And the money gained would be used to increase, make better mass transit for most of the people who travel. The preference would be people not to drive in during those hours and in Midtown, but if they do, I think congestion pricing makes the most sense to do what we need to do. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and I will now ask the committee counsel to go over some procedural items and swear in the representatives from the MTA.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Sam Breitbart, counsel to the Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure for the New York City Council. Our first witnesses will be from the MTA, Rich Davey, New York City Transit President, Jai Patel, the MTA Deputy CFO, Dr. Allison C. DiSereno, MTA Bridges and Tunnels COO, and Will Schwartz, MTA Deputy Chief for Government and Community Relations. I will now administer the oath. Please raise your right hands. Do you affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth before this committee and to respond honestly to council member questions? Thank you. You may begin when ready.
Thank you. Good morning, and thank you for having us here today, especially to the chair, Brooks Powers, who we've been able to work together on a number of projects, and I look forward to continuing to do that. We appreciate the opportunity to be back with you all here today. As mentioned, I'm Rich Davey, the president of New York City Transit. I'm also joined today by the MTA Deputy Chief Financial Officer, Jay Patel, MTA Bridges and Tunnels Chief Operating Officer, Allison DiSereno, and as mentioned, Will Schwartz, who runs our government and community relations for the MTA. I apologize in advance for going on a bit long today, but there's much to report since I was before you last March. I was here last March to discuss our budget, and in a few short months, the MTA situation has changed dramatically for the better. The enacted fiscal 2024 state budget included a framework for a long-term, stable funding for the MTA for years to come. Chair Lieber, myself, and the entire leadership team at MTA are grateful to the governor and the legislature for their bold leadership on addressing the MTA's fiscal cliff. Not only did they choose to address it head-on, but this was, which is not the typical one-shot solution that's occurred in the past, but deploying a long-term fiscal improvement. At our July board meeting, we presented the July financial plan showing, for the first time in anyone's recollection at the MTA, 5 straight years of balanced budgets through 2027. All our operating agencies, my friends at the commuter railroads included, are now crushing ridership records. I'm incredibly proud to say that subways have carried 4+ million riders a day several times now, and I would expect we'll be breaking records when school comes back in a few weeks. Buses are holding strong, and paratransit is even exceeding its pre-COVID ridership totals, thanks to strong ridership and strong service there. This is key because continued gains in paid ridership, as mentioned by the chair, is vital to the fiscal plan becoming a reality. I want to quickly pass it to Jay Patel, a colleague of mine who worked very closely in putting this and crafting this together with the legislature and the governor's office to walk through the details of the enacted state budget as it relates to MTA's funding. Jay?
Thanks, Rich. As mentioned, the state's fiscal 2024 budget was enacted in May of this year. The MTA's finances are in a dramatically better state than they were when we presented the February financial plan to the MTA board. Key elements of the funding package include an increase in the payroll mobility tax for paid for by the city employers that will generate approximately $1.1 billion in recurring revenue to the MTA. A one-shot appropriation of $300 million in 2023 paid for by the state of New York. An increased contribution from our partners, the City of New York, on paratransit. Under the new framework, the city will cover 80% of costs, up from the 50%, or approximately $165 million over the next few years. 100% of the downstate casino licenses when they are awarded. That's up to 3 of them, worth a total of $500 million each. And either 50% or 40% of the recurring tax revenues from those casinos will be dedicated to the MTA, depending on whether they are located within the 5 boroughs or one of the downstate suburban counties. $65 million is earmarked to bring the planned biannual fare increase down to our standard 4% rather than the 5.5% that was under consideration as part of our 2023 budget when we presented and adopted in December 2022. Lest you think the MTA is getting off easy in this plan, the final funding plan in the budget calls for our operating agencies to deliver $400 million in recurring savings starting in 2024. Rich and his team are already delivering for efficiencies at New York City Transit, while Kathy Rinaldi is delivering the same for Long Island Railroad and Metro North. Furthermore, we are challenging the agencies to do more, hoping to push the $400 million in annual savings to $500 million in the out years, beginning in 2025. The MTA's finances are on stable ground and include the largest labor contract for TW Local 100 ever negotiating, having been ratified earlier in this summer. This contract sets the pattern for our other bargaining units. This is an important piece of the financial plan, and we are pleased to achieve a good contract for the largest bargaining unit at the MTA in good faith. Rich, I'll pass it back to you to discuss some other good news out of the enacted state budget.
Great, thanks, Jay. I was beyond excited that the enacted budget didn't just address our fiscal cliff, but indeed it invested in more transit. Thanks to a $35 million investment in the budget, we are increasing subway service in the off-peak hours, midday, early evenings, and weekends. These are periods of time that we're seeing the strongest ridership recovery relative to the pandemic, particularly as New Yorkers redefine their, quote, 9-to-5 commute. This is already underway as we've rolled out increased service on the J, G, M, 1, and 6 lines, with more to come. Also, as part of the state's budget, we are going to study the impact of fare-free buses through a limited pilot on one route in each borough. The 5 routes were selected in conformity with the legislation included in the budget requiring the pilot and will allow us to learn the impacts of this concept. The pilot will launch on the BX18, the B60, the M116, the Q4, both limited and local, and the S4696 later this month. Finally, from the state budget, I'm especially excited about a provision to expand authorization for automated cameras so we can build on the successes of our ABLE program, which help keep non-buses out of our bus lanes, a big pet peeve of mine. Under this new authorization, the MTA and our partners at New York City DOT will be able to enforce bus-related traffic violations such as double parking and illegal parking at bus stops. Again, I want to thank the chair for your support on this issue, and the 34 city council members voiced their support, which was included, which was also instrumental. Your constituents and our 1.5 million bus customers appreciate your advocacy. Well, not directly resulting from the budget, once we knew we were on stable footing financially, we were finally able to advance the long-awaited second phase of our widely popular e-hail on-demand paratransit pilot under the leadership of Chris Pangolin and his team. We are proud to be tripling the number of participants in the pilot for nearly the exact same budget. We look forward to seeing how this program works with real parameters in place and with a more representative sample of our customers from the Access-a-Ride customer base. I mentioned earlier that ridership is growing, and in addition, we are setting a new standard for service for New Yorkers. For the first 6 months of 2023, subways averaged 84% weekday on-time performance, the best 6 months we've had in at least a decade. Buses are almost 85% on time, and paratransit is doing better, with 96% of broker trips and 97% of primary carrier trips completed on time. And customers are telling us there is a difference. Customer satisfaction since I've joined in the last 18 months has grown across all 3 modes. 6 in 10 of our subway customers say they're satisfied or very satisfied. 65% of our bus customers satisfied or very satisfied. And 75% of our paratransit customers satisfied or very satisfied. Obviously work to do, but we're making great strides. We've also come a long way in safety. The collaborative COPS, cameras, and care program put forward by the governor and the mayor has made a real difference in keeping customers and transit workers safe and holding those who commit crimes underground accountable. And thanks to our partnership with the NYPD Transit Bureau, and I want to call out Chief Kemper for his leadership in particular, crime underground is down 4.4% year to date, while ridership continues to rise. It's important to all of us that people feel safe and are safe using our system. On-time performance, safety, and cleanliness are paramount for my team and me. That's because these are the things that our customers and your constituents truly care about. Customer satisfaction, I have said often, is our North Star. Faster, cleaner, safer service is our motto, which is why in addition to our efforts on service, we've added 800 station and car cleaners over the last 12 months. Brand new customer service centers have opened at 12 locations system-wide, with more on the way. Our station agents have come out of the booth, the so-called token booth, for the first time ever, and are now assisting customers throughout the station environment. That initiative was born out of New York City Transit's mandate to put our customers first. Dozens of stations are getting a refresh through our station renovation program, when we close a station for a weekend and go in and do work and heavy clean. We will do 60 of these renovations by the end of this year, given that they are leveraging, as I mentioned, existing track work and shutdowns, so customers won't feel additional pain. I'm also pleased to report that we've opened 100 bathrooms at 50 subway stations, with bathrooms at 5 more stations opening up by the end of the month. Finally, as you know, we are moving full steam ahead on congestion pricing. Having completed the federally mandated environmental assessment for the Central Business District Tolling Program, and the infrastructure is being installed as we speak, and the Traffic Mobility Review Board has begun meeting, in fact, they'll be meeting later today, to continue work toward their statutorily guided process, which will make formal recommendations to the TBTA board for the program's framework. As president of New York City Transit, I need to say that I am an enthusiastic supporter of congestion pricing, and we need it now. Not to just reduce the insane gridlock that slows our buses, emergency vehicles, and our paratransit vehicles, but also to improve public health, meet the state's ambitious climate goals, and most importantly, fund MTA's historic 2020 to 2024 capital program. The money raised from congestion pricing is going to help pay for much needed upgrades that will bring our transit system into the 21st century, from accessible stations to new rolling stock, like our brand new R211 subway cars on the A line, Madam Chair. In fact, we rolled out our 4th this week. They're cutting-edge subway cars replacing 50-year-old trains, currently eligible for the AARP, running on the A and C lines. That is what congestion pricing is going to buy, investment in our transit system. So we're excited about taking this next step in the approval process. Before I conclude, I do want to take a moment to voice both my personal appreciation and the MTA's as well for the mayor, the speaker, and this council for increasing the funding for the Fair Fares program in the enacted city budget. Chair Brooks Powers, I know how hard you and your colleagues worked to push for more, and we continue to support increasing the eligibility threshold to 200% of the federal poverty line. But progress is progress, and we applaud you for prioritizing fair fares in this budget. As we at the MTA look for ways to curb fare evasion, the first step should be to ensure that anyone who cannot truly afford the fare, that help is available. We offer discounts for disabled and elderly customers, but the city's Fair Fare programs has been a vital lifeline for those who qualify. We've begun piloting Fair Fare staff, or inviting Fair Fare staff, to attend my biweekly transit talks, and we're also piloting some satellite office hours with Fair Fares at our new customer service centers. I'm proud to share that the Department of Buses and the MTA customer team have been busy on the streets over the last 2 weeks, engaging directly with bus customers, meeting with over 25,000 riders at bus stops, and sharing information on how to ride transit for reduced fares through the Reduced Fare or Fair Fares program, along with the importance of fare compliance. And we are making progress on our commitment to reduce fare evasion. A huge thank you to the members of my Eagle team who are critical to supporting this historic expansion of bus fare payment. We need an all-hands deck for this watershed moment for mass transit in the region. We're determined to deliver for New Yorkers. Again, thank you for having me, and happy to take your questions.
Thank you so much for your testimony and for your presence today. We'll jump right into some of the questions. I want to start with congestion pricing, implementation, and funding. What is the current timeline for the implementation of congestion pricing, and what steps have been taken to date?
I'll give maybe some broad, and ask my colleague, Dr. Allison DeSereno, to mention. I mean, as mentioned, the statute, the statute is pretty clear. Once we receive the federal FONSI, if you will, then it's to the 6 appointed representatives on the Traffic Mobility Review Board to consider, among other things, exemptions, as you mentioned, and the implementation of this. As I also mentioned in my testimony, we actually are starting to implement the infrastructure, or install the infrastructure, so when that process is complete, we'll be able to flip the switch, if you will. But there's still a process to be had. I'll let Dr. Serrano maybe comment on a little more.
Thank you, Rich. And thank you, council members. Yes, as Rich explained, we received our finding of no significant impact on the environmental assessment in June of 2023, recently. We subsequently began working with the vendor responsible for construction, who has already begun to finalize the system design and to begin installation of the toll system and infrastructure around the central business district. So some of you may have seen some of what we call poles and mast arms. They look a lot like the regular traffic signal and light signal poles and mast arms that you see around the city already, but you'll notice slightly different equipment hanging off. The vendor has up to 310 days from that June date to finish the design, finish the installation and construction, and the testing of the system before it goes live. As Rich mentioned, the Traffic Mobility Review Board has begun their meetings so that they can develop their recommendations. Importantly, as part of this process, after we go through the TMRB process, there will be a formal process with the board for the state administrative procedure process, which includes additional hearings at that time. And subsequent to that, by statute, we have a 30-day required period of testing to ensure that everything is working smoothly. And we also have a 60-day requirement for additional outreach and communication beyond what we've already done and we continue to do to ensure that everybody understands how this is going to actually run, what they need to do as they come in and out of the central business district. Finally, just want to also make clear for folks, at the tail end of it, after go live, there is also a required 60-day period where we sort of let people learn how to use it before we address anybody who hasn't paid appropriately or on time. So it gives a little bit of time for people to learn.
So with the infrastructure being installed already, like what does that coordination with the city look like? Has there been coordination with the city?
Yes, we've been coordinating with the city since the initial legislation was passed. Within 60 days, we signed a memorandum of understanding with City Department of Transportation. They are heavily involved with us on the infrastructure and have been all along. That includes the design pieces, that includes the locations, that includes the, everything that we continue to do now in terms of where we're going to be locating the infrastructure and when it is happening, when it is actually going in. We also, through my colleague Will here, have been ensuring that the different community groups are aware as infrastructure starts to go up in their area.
Would I be able to get a copy of, in the committee, get a copy of the MOU?
Yeah, in fact, it's actually in the final EA, but we can send or work with Will to get that to you. That'd be great to pull out.
And is there a point person or a team at the MTA that's specifically tasked with coordinating with the city?
Chair, that would be me and my team.
Okay.
And we've been communicating with council members in the Central Business District as infrastructure is going out. As Dr. DiSereno pointed out, the timeline is dictated by DOT permits, so intimately involved. And we've been sending out a weekly look ahead to the community so that they know what's coming and that there's point of contact. There's information available with the workforce out there. If members of the public have questions, we're trying to be as clear as possible.
And what is the role of the Department of Transportation as you are in this implementation phase?
Allison, you want to take that?
Certainly. Again, they've been actually involved from the get-go. They're actually a co-project sponsor on the environmental review. They are responsible, along with us and New York State Department of Transportation, which was the other co-project team member. All three agencies are responsible for different aspects of the mitigation that will be implemented as part of our findings from the final environmental assessment. And we work very closely with them, as I mentioned, as we go out to the different communities to ensure that everybody understands what is happening.
That's interesting information, because what's been shared with me is that the city looks at the MTA as the one of having the full authority. So being defined as a co-project sponsor is interesting. So will the MTA prioritize capital spending on servicing mass transit deserts whose residents disproportionately bear the burden of congestion pricing?
Well, I think the answer is we're going to be prioritizing, transit investments across the 5 boroughs and beyond, for sure. I can tell you that one thing that continues to concern me running a agency, an organization that was built in part in 1904, that there's a lot of investment we need to make in things that everybody in this room, we don't see on a day-to-day basis, whether it's power, fan rooms, communication. Certainly, we're going to be spending a lot of money as part of this on our ADA accessibility program, which seeks to get to 95% accessibility on our subways in the next 30 years. So suffice to say, there are a lot of investments we need to make across New York City Transit, and of course, bridges and tunnels and the railroads. As I mentioned, there's a lot of our investment that will help those folks in transit deserts and in other places across the city, for sure.
I just want to add to that, as we had you stand with us in an event the other day announcing a Far Rockaway ticket. So beyond capital infrastructure, there's policy goals that we can work towards, and that was a joint goal identified in the new New York panel between the governor and the mayor to make railroads more affordable in New York City. That's been a priority for Chairman Lieber as well. We don't always accept the term of our transit desert. Often people are referring to rail deserts, which is fair because the subway does not go everywhere in the 5 boroughs. But there are communities where we have railroad access that has previously been unaffordable for people, to say the least. So we have incrementally made that more affordable, taking what was a weekend-only city ticket program. We moved it to a 7-day-a-week pilot program in the off-peak, and we are now proud to announce that starting next week, you're going to see what we call universal city ticket with a peak ticket price and an off-peak ticket price, but that's going to make the commuter railroads much more affordable and approachable for many communities that previously didn't see them as an affordable option.
So I will say I'm a bit concerned with the response in terms of looking at it in terms from a 5-borough perspective. So when I talk about equity, right, it's not everyone starting from the same vantage point, because there are communities that have been left behind for a long time. So it's being able to allow them to catch up and then being able to jump leaps and bounds together. And so all along, the MTA has shared that with congestion pricing, this money would be prioritized for transportation deserts. And so I'm very zeroed in, laser focused on what that could look like and what that will look like. Because congestion pricing can't just solely be about revenue being generated. It has to also be about how communities that are marginalized are going to be, taken into account with this as well.
I think it's a fair point you're raising, and I just want to point out specifically, let's talk about Southeast Queens. So for almost 30 years, that community was promised a new Jamaica bus depot. This capital program, the 2020...
That's already paid for. That doesn't count.
No, but Madam Chair, that's being paid for by revenues in this capital program, which will ultimately be supported by congestion pricing. Hollis Station, other priorities that you've raised, and we have examples around the city that we're happy to provide offline, but I do want to emphasize that there are major investments being made in the outer boroughs that have been long overdue and asked for by your community that will be supported by congestion pricing revenues.
So which capital projects does the MTA anticipate spending the money collected from congestion pricing?
I think, again, as Will said, that the money collected is supporting the 20 to 24 capital plan. So the capital plan we're currently in. It's expected to raise about $1 billion, which should be able for us to be able to leverage $15 billion in capital spend, again, across the 5 boroughs. So that's that's what it's designed to do, is to pay for that current plan, which is mentioned again, at least for New York City Transit. Almost $2.5 billion in ADA upgrades. We've purchased the R211 cars, as you know, Chair. Those go through your district. And as I made the joke, they're replacing the AARP cars we have, the 50-year-old cars. There's a whole host of other projects, signal upgrades. I think if you haven't been down to the City Hall signal room, I'm happy to take you there on a tour. A few weeks ago I did, and the signal components were literally installed in the 1950s, if you can imagine that. It's going to really be focused on both state of good repair and for hopefully in the future to allow us to expand service as we are in some key locations, as I mentioned in my testimony.
So
I
when
should
I
also
think
mention
about-
too, I'm sorry,
No.
one other important point, because this will be across all 5 boroughs over the next, 16 years, 17 years, which is our commitment to go to zero-emission bus. I think the public advocate mentioned earlier about air quality in some boroughs, in some, neighborhoods in particular that have been, left behind. I couldn't agree more. And I think for us to be able to find ways to deliver, continued bus service, but that's not adding to negative air quality is key. And so, as you know, we have a pretty aggressive plan to go to zero emissions bus, largely electric. We're also going to be testing hydrogen as well, but that will be across the 5 boroughs over the coming, decade and a half.
Will there be like service enhancements? So for example, I know like some of my colleagues in my neck of the woods have shared, for example, like the A train. There are significantly more A trains that go to Lefferts compared to Far Rockaway, a growing community in the Rockaways. Will there be increase in A train services like towards the Rockaways? We are in the midst of the bus redesign, and at some point I do want to have a few questions on the status of the bus redesigns, but with the bus redesign proposals that we've seen, there are bus stops that are being taken away. And so in communities that are dependent, like when you look at Councilwoman Lee's district, for example, which has no train, no rail, just buses, or you look in Canarsie in communities like Councilmember Narcisse's district that rely on buses, how is this congestion pricing helping to get those New Yorkers to where they need to go?
In a number of ways. I mean, congestion pricing as a general matter will reduce congestion in our streets, which will help speed up our buses. There's no question about that. And the congestion pricing itself, again, as a capital, as a way to raise capital dollars, will allow us to purchase those electric buses I mentioned, but also to retrofit the 7 bus depots we have across the 5 boroughs for charging stations as well, right? So there's a lot of infrastructure, sort of back of house, if you will, that's required to support that change. So again, we're excited about that, but I was out front earlier in saying that faster bus service, cleaner air, and safer streets is what congestion pricing is going to deliver.
And you mentioned signal upgrades a few times. How long will that project take, and what lines would it be along?
So eventually, the expectation is over all lines, but right now we're rolling it out across a few lines. The idea is to replicate what we have, particularly on the 7 line now, right? So the 7 line has fully deployed CBTC communication-based train control, and it is our best performing line. It's our highest customer satisfaction, and it allows us to run really tight headways. So at rush hour, we're running 2 to 3 minute service because we have a modern signal system. The capital plan does call for, exact the amount, but it's over $1 billion in CBTC, certainly on 6th Ave. But the goal is to continue to put out projects. The challenge we have is balancing the need to provide service on those lines while rolling out CBTC. So, you do see frequently on the weekends and nights impacts to customers, some service changes, because that's typically when we get all that work done. So retire the legacy signal system and bring a new modern system that's, again, safe and allows us to run, more frequent service potentially in the future.
The city's Vision Zero goal is to bring traffic fatalities on the city streets to zero. Is the MTA working with the Department of Transportation to incorporate complete street treatments for the congestion price and entry points to ensure our streets are designed to enable safe use and support mobility for all New Yorkers?
In general, the answer is yes. I mean, as Dr. DiSereno pointed out, not just on congestion pricing, but anything relating to our bus planning operations, the city's implementation of Vision Zero, there is an all-time partnership under this mayor, our administration, and the governor on coordination between MTA and DOT.
So in the design and everything, that's already being taken into account?
Regular conversations between our planners, their planners. It's a very unique piece of MTA and DOT interoperability where we operate a bus system on their streets, and we do so in some instances under contract with the city. But yes, absolutely.
And just going back to the earlier question around the infrastructure that's already being installed, how many cameras will be installed as a part of the tolling program, and where will the cameras be placed?
I don't have the exact number of cameras offhand, and I'll explain why in a moment that we can get that for you. There are 120 what we call detection points that will be around the central business district, or in some cases within. The vast majority of them, again,
state on agriculture of perhaps up to $300 million annually, and that's mainly the grape and the wine industry. And of course, associated with the wine and the grape industry is a lot of tourism, and a lot of people will be going from areas where spotted lanternfly is present to areas where it is not currently present, and we want to make sure people know how to make sure they're not transporting spotted lanternfly into new areas as they enjoy our agricultural and natural resources. So here in New York City, SLF is really at its peak. It's reached the adult phase, and the challenge, as I said, that we face now is protecting urban gardens and farms, and we really have to thank Cornell Cooperative Extension for their partnership. And as I said, we're very much focused on the east end of Long Island, where we have some grape growers that are probably closest to the infested areas. We also wanted to stress that residents of New York City do not need to continue to report sightings of spotted lanternfly to us at Ag and Markets, at DEC, or at Parks, or to any of our other partners. We know they're here present in New York City. We certainly understand that they are a nuisance. We want to stress that they are not harmful to you, your pets, or to forest or urban trees. We're still getting large numbers of reports. I spoke with one of our staff out on the western end of Long Island earlier this week, and he reported that over the 24-hour period from Sunday to Monday this past week, we had over 600 reports from outside of New York City, and we're averaging over 1,000 reports collectively every day. So one of the really important things, I know people, when they report this, they're expecting a call back. They might be expecting somebody to come and visit them and talk with them about spotted lanternfly. There just aren't enough of us to go around and to personally talk with everybody. Part of the reason that we're here today, to try to get this message out, and also to have some of our partners talk a little bit about what some of the things you all can do to limit the spread of spotted lanternfly. We do certainly encourage everybody to continue to either step on spotted lanternfly to get rid of it, or if you're a property owner, you can work with Cornell Cooperative Extension or the IPM program to get a sense of what kinds of management techniques you can use to reduce the population. We encourage all of those things, but I do want to reiterate, we do not need any more reports out of New York City. So today what we're going to do is we'll give you some helpful resources for you New Yorkers who are struggling with the spotted lanternfly infestation on their properties. Shortly, you're going to hear from my colleague Brian Eschnauer, who is with Cornell's Integrated Pest Management Program. He'll talk about trapping. He'll talk about some of the other management techniques that people can use. And I think it's very, very important to focus in on those positive actions that we can take. I also wanted to talk a little bit about a bright spot in spotted lanternfly. One of the really bright spots with spotted lanternfly has been how the research community has come together to try to address the problem. All of the things that we're doing right now with surveying for spotted lanternfly, treating for spotted lanternfly, these are measures that we put in place to slow the spread, but ultimately what we really need is some type of a natural control that perhaps gets the population down to a level that's acceptable to everybody and doesn't threaten our agricultural industry. So we have really great researchers at Cornell and a number of other universities across the country, as well as at the USDA, who are really working hard to try to find long-term solutions to the spotted lanternfly and to try to keep it from being a nuisance for all of us and causing issues with agricultural products. Right now, there are about 13 states that are working to combat spotted lanternfly. New York State has been at the table. We were involved with the development of USDA's 5-year strategic plan that was recently released at a press event down in Pennsylvania. And that 5-year strategic plan really focuses on research as a main avenue to control this invasive species long term, but it also sets out some areas for focus for state departments of agriculture as well as for the USDA. So for the USDA, the focus is really trying to protect the ports of entry and the places where exports are happening. And one of the reason that we do that is that if we have spotted lanternfly around a container port or an airport, that potentially creates a bottleneck for people and for products going out of those ports. And so USDA is responsible for those ports and is taking a hard stand on survey and treatment around the ports. State departments of agriculture are really focusing in on the agricultural industry, and in particular for us here in New York, as I said before, the grape industry. Finally, I just wanted to mention our really great partners at the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. So at its core, spotted lanternfly is an invasive species. Justin and I and our respective commissioners co-chair the New York State Invasive Species Council. We work very closely together with 9 state agencies to address invasive species and have a very strong working relationship. So now I'd really like to introduce my colleague Justin Perry. He is with the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. He is the Bureau Chief of the Bureau of Invasive Species and Ecosystem Health within the Division of Lands and Forests. And he's going to talk a little bit about their role on spotted